I'm Major Aaron Brooks, 34 years old, and I worked my way from a small-town scholarship cadet to a commissioned officer in the United States Air Force. For years, I showed up for everyone, covered rent, held families together through deployments, and kept the peace no matter how disrespectful the jokes got. But when my brother-in-law mocked my service in front of a crowd, and I finally said my call sign, Valkyrie Six, everything shifted. Have you ever been underestimated, laughed at, or dismissed by someone you once defended? If so, you're in good company. Tell me your story in the comments. You're not the only one who's had to prove quiet strength in a loud room. Before I tell you what happened that night, let me know where you're listening from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground after being humiliated, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about setting boundaries and reclaiming your worth. What followed after Valkyrie Six might surprise you. I arrived at the family barbecue at 1700 hours, still in my dress blues. The ceremony had run long, a commendation for our squadron's performance during the last deployment cycle, and I'd driven straight from base rather than miss my sister's birthday celebration entirely. The insignia on my uniform caught the late afternoon sunlight as I stepped out of my car, the silver oak leaves at my collar marking 4 years as a major in the United States Air Force. My parents saw me first. Mom's face brightened, but there was that familiar flicker of something else, concern, maybe, or the quiet acknowledgement that my life existed in a world she didn't quite understand. Dad raised his beer in greeting, a smile that said he was proud even if he couldn't articulate why. There she is, Rachel called out from the patio, waving me over. My younger sister by 3 years, she'd always been the social one, the one who fit easily into gatherings like this. She'd married Mark Turner 2 years ago, and since then, these family events had acquired a different texture. Mark's friends were always around, former Marines, most of them, now running a contracting business together. They brought a particular energy to everything, loud and self-assured in a way that made civilian spaces feel like extensions of some perpetual barracks. I'd learned to navigate it. Learned to let the jokes about chair force and flyboys slide off without reaction. It wasn't worth the effort to explain that most of them had never seen the inside of AC-130 at altitude or felt the hydraulic shudder when you're bringing wounded personnel home under fire. They had their version of service, and I had mine. Look at you, Rachel said, hugging me carefully to avoid wrinkling the uniform. Very official. Did you win something? Squadron recognition, I said. Team effort. Mark approached with that easy swagger he'd cultivated since leaving active duty. He'd done 4 years as a lance corporal, got out, and built a decent business doing security contracts. Good for him, honestly. But somewhere in that transition, he'd appointed himself the authority on all things military. Commandant Clipboard made it, he announced to his buddies, who were clustered around the grill. They laughed on cue. It was the nickname they'd given me 6 months ago, after I'd mentioned coordinating logistics for a training exercise. Never mind that the exercise involved 60 aircraft and 3,000 personnel across 2 time zones. I smiled thinly. Mark. Nah, I'm kidding. He clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to sting. Glad you could make it. Beer. Water's fine. Water. Right. Gotta stay sharp for all that paperwork. The comment drew more laughter from his friends. I recognized most of them from previous gatherings. There was Gunny Morales, a gunnery sergeant who'd actually done 2 tours in Anbar province and had the quiet competence of someone who didn't need to prove anything. He gave me a nod that felt more genuine than the others' performances. Beside him stood 2 younger guys whose names I'd never caught, both in their late 20s and eager to match Mark's energy. Rachel appeared at my elbow with water in a plastic cup. Ignore them. You know how they get. I did know. It had been building for months, this low-grade mockery disguised as camaraderie. The comments about the Air Force being the soft branch. The implications that my work was somehow less valid because it didn't involve humping a ruck through hostile territory. I'd let it go because maintaining family peace seemed more important than defending my service record to people who'd already made up their minds. But something felt different today. Maybe it was the ceremony I'd just left, where a lieutenant colonel with 22 years had pinned a medal on our squadron commander and talked about the lives we'd covered from above. Maybe it was the exhaustion that came from another 70-hour week preparing for an operational readiness inspection. Or maybe it was just that I'd grown tired of making myself smaller so other people could feel bigger. "Your sister was just telling us about your deployment," one of Mark's friends said. "I think his name was Derek. Sounds like you got to see some interesting places." "A few," I said carefully. "Must be nice, flying over everything," Mark cut in. "Climate-controlled cockpit, hot meals. Not like boots on the ground, but hey, someone's gotta coordinate the supply drops, right?" There it was, the casual dismissal wrapped in faux appreciation. As if my 3 deployments had been some kind of extended field trip rather than months of mission planning, target coordination, and bringing aircraft home through conditions that made instruments unreliable and judgment the only thing keeping everyone alive. Rachel shot Mark a look, but he either didn't notice or didn't care. He was playing to his audience now, emboldened by their attention. I thought about Lieutenant Jason Lee, my wingman during my second rotation. 24 years old, sharp as they came, died when his aircraft took ground fire during a support mission over Anbar. I thought about the memorial service where his mother asked me if he'd been scared, and I'd lied and said he went instantly, peacefully, even though I'd heard him on comms trying to stabilize the hydraulics for 90 seconds before impact. But I didn't say any of that. You learn at 04 that some stories aren't meant to be told at backyard barbecues. Some experiences don't translate into civilian language, and trying to force the translation only cheapens what happened. "Paperwork keeps the whole machine running," I said evenly. "Someone has to make sure you all get paid." Mark laughed. "See? She gets it. Nothing wrong with a desk job. Honorable work." Gunny Morales wasn't laughing. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, not sympathy exactly, but something like recognition. Like he understood the conversation happening underneath the conversation. My father appeared then, mercifully, asking if I wanted to help him with the salad. I excused myself and followed him into the kitchen, where Mom was arranging store-bought cookies on a platter. "You okay, sweetie?" she asked. "Mark's just being Mark." "I know." I washed my hands at the sink, watching the soap foam between my fingers. "It's fine." "You've always been so patient with people," Dad said, tearing lettuce into a wooden bowl. "Even when you were little. Your sister would lose her temper, but you'd just wait them out." It was true. I'd learned early that responding to provocation only gave it power. Better to absorb, deflect, move forward. It had served me well in the military, where hot tempers got people killed and cool heads kept missions on track. But standing there in my parents' kitchen, still wearing the uniform I'd earned through 12 years of service, flight school, combat rotations, and more sleepless nights than I could count, I felt something shift. Some internal calculation that had always favored peace over pride, deflection over defense. Maybe it was time to stop waiting them out. The dynamic had shifted gradually over the past 2 years, so slowly I hadn't noticed the erosion until I was standing in it. When Rachel first started dating Mark, he'd been almost deferential. He'd asked questions about my work with genuine curiosity, wanted to know about the aircraft I flew, the places I'd been stationed. But something changed after their wedding, or maybe it had been changing all along and the marriage just gave it permission to surface. The first real jab came at Thanksgiving, about 18 months after they'd gotten married. Mark's father had served in Vietnam, Army infantry, and the conversation turned to service branches over dessert. Mark mentioned that his dad always said the Marines and Army did the real fighting while everyone else played support. "Not that there's anything wrong with support," Mark had added quickly, looking at me. "Air Force does important work. Just different work." Rachel had laughed, picked up the thread. "Yeah, Aaron basically runs logistics, right? Makes sure everything's in the right place at the right time. Like a really high-stakes wedding planner." The table had found that funny. Even my mother smiled. I'd kept my expression neutral, explained briefly that operations planning involved more than logistics, and let the moment pass. It seemed easier than unpacking the actual scope of what I did, the classified briefings, the target assessment, the constant weight of knowing that your decisions shaped missions where people lived or died based on whether you'd accounted for every variable. After that, the comments came more frequently. At Christmas, Mark gave me a gift-wrapped clipboard with major paperwork written on it in silver Sharpie. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, even though something in my chest pulled tight. By spring, his Marine buddies had adopted the joke. They'd started showing up at family events regularly, Mark's contracting business had taken off, and he'd hired 3 of his former squad mates. They came as a unit, loud and proprietary, turning my parents' backyard into an extension of their workspace. They talked about contracts, about physical fitness routines, about the inadequacy of civilian life compared to the clarity of military structure. I understood the impulse. I'd felt it too, that disorientation of coming back stateside, where people cared more about traffic delays than global stability, where the stakes felt simultaneously higher and completely arbitrary. But I'd stayed in. I'd made the choice to remain in uniform, to accept the transfers and deployments, to let relationships fade because I was never in one place long enough to maintain them properly. The price of that choice was starting to show. I was 34, single, living in base housing that felt temporary even though I'd been there for 2 years. My closest relationships were with people I supervised or who supervised me, professional bonds that existed within clearly defined parameters. My parents worried about me in that specific way parents worry when they think you're sacrificing too much for a job they don't fully understand. Rachel worried too, but her worry had curdled into something else. Into resentment, maybe, or defensiveness. She'd chosen marriage and civilian life, had built something tangible and immediate. When she looked at me, I think she saw either a judgment on her choices or a cautionary tale. Either way, it made her sharp. You should take leave more often, she'd told me last Easter. You're starting to seem, I don't know, disconnected. Like you're always somewhere else even when you're standing right here. She wasn't wrong. Part of me was always elsewhere, running through mission parameters, thinking about the readiness inspection coming up, worrying about the junior officer I was mentoring who showed signs of burnout. The Air Force had trained me to think systematically, to see problems as puzzles requiring specific solutions, and I couldn't turn that off at family gatherings. Mark's friend Derek, the one who'd mentioned my deployment earlier, sidled up to me while I was refilling my water. He had the particular confidence of someone who'd never questioned whether he belonged in a room. So, what exactly do you do? He asked. Day to day, I mean. Mark says you coordinate stuff, but what does that actually look like? I'd answered this question enough times to have a civilian-friendly version prepared. I'm an operations officer. I help plan and execute missions, make sure resources are allocated correctly, coordinate between different units and commands. Huh. He nodded like I'd confirmed something. So yeah, logistics. Supply chain management, but with planes. Not exactly. I kept my tone light. It's more about Derek. Mark called from the patio. Get over here, we're settling the bracket debate. Derek gave me an apologetic shrug and headed back outside. I stood there holding my water, watching through the kitchen window as the group reformed around Mark, their attention fixed on him like he was the gravity well around which everything else orbited. My father finished with a salad. You want to talk about it? Nothing to talk about. Aaron. He set down the tongs, looked at me directly. You've been carrying something heavy for a while now. I can see it. Your mother can see it. I considered telling him about Lieutenant Lee. About the night flights over hostile territory when visibility dropped to nothing and you flew on instruments and faith. About the exhaustion that came from being responsible for other people's lives in situations where there was no room for error. About how it felt to be good at something, genuinely skilled, respected by peers who understood what the work demanded, and then come home to people who thought it was all bureaucratic theater. But I didn't. He wouldn't have understood not because he wasn't capable, but because the experience couldn't be translated. It lived in muscle memory and trained reflexes, in the particular quality of silence that falls over a briefing room when everyone realizes the mission just got more complicated. I'm fine, Dad. Just tired. He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded. Well, if you need anything. You know that, right? You can always, I know. Thank you. We carried the food outside together. The sun had dropped lower, casting long shadows across the yard. Mark's group had expanded, a few neighbors drawn over by the noise and the smell of grilling meat. Rachel was laughing at something someone said, her head thrown back, completely at ease in a way I envied. I'd made sacrifices for my career. I knew that. I'd accepted the trade-offs. But standing there watching my sister's life, watching her move through the world with that easy belonging, I felt the full weight of what I'd given up. Not regret, exactly. Just the clear-eyed acknowledgement that choices have consequences, and you don't get to go back and pick different ones. Gunny Morales caught my eye from across the patio and raised his beer slightly, a gesture of recognition or maybe solidarity. I nodded back. At least someone here understood that service meant something. The light had that particular golden quality that comes right before evening, soft and forgiving. Someone had turned on music, something classic rock from the 80s. The beer was flowing freely now, conversations getting louder and more animated. This was the point in the gathering where everything started to blur together, where individual voices merged into a general hum of conviviality. I should have left then. I'd made my appearance, done my duty as the sister and daughter. But something kept me there, some stubborn part that refused to retreat even though every instinct suggested extraction would be wise. Mark was holding court near the grill, telling a story about a security contract that had gone sideways in Dubai. His buddies were laughing, contributing their own anecdotes, the conversation flowing with the easy rhythm of men who'd spent years developing a shared language. The thing is, Mark was saying, you learn to read situations fast. You can't hesitate. You see a threat, you assess, you act. That's what separates professionals from amateurs. Rachel stood beside him, her hand on his arm, smiling at the story even though she'd probably heard it before. She looked happy. That was important to note. Whatever else was happening, my sister had found something that worked for her. Maybe that's what made the next part sting so much, not that Mark was cruel, but that Rachel had chosen to stand beside the cruelty rather than question it. "Hey Aaron," Mark called out, waving me over. "Come settle something for us." I approached cautiously. The group parted slightly to include me in their circle, and I felt immediately like a specimen being examined, interesting but fundamentally other. "We're talking about call signs," Mark explained. Gunny here was saying how they did nicknames in his unit, and Derek mentioned that pilots have them too, right? Like Top Gun. "Some pilots do," I said carefully. "So do you have one?" This from one of the younger guys, genuinely curious. "Like an official call sign?" "Yes." Mark's grin widened. He'd found his angle, whatever he'd been building toward. "Well, come on, don't be shy." "What is it?" "Let me guess." He turned to his audience, playing it up. "What would they give an operations officer?" "Paper pusher 1? Clipboard queen." The laughter started, building momentum. Even some of the neighbors chuckled, drawn into the performance. "File manager," another voice suggested. "Excel spreadsheet." "Requisition form." They were enjoying themselves, riffing on the theme, each suggestion more mocking than the last. Rachel was laughing too, covering her mouth like she knew she shouldn't but couldn't help herself. My mother looked uncomfortable but didn't intervene. She'd never been good at confronting Mark, and this seemed like harmless teasing to someone who didn't understand the context. I felt something crystallize inside me, cold and clear. This was the moment I'd been moving toward all evening, maybe for months. The moment where I either continued to absorb and deflect, or I pushed back. The decision felt significant in a way that had nothing to do with Mark or his friends, and everything to do with how I wanted to move through the world. Major. 04. 12 years of service. 3 combat deployments. 273 missions. 67 personnel under my current command. A record that spoke for itself if anyone cared to look. I waited for the laughter to die down. Let the silence stretch just long enough to become noticeable. Then I looked directly at Mark and said, very clearly, Valkyrie 6. The effect was immediate and profound. Gunny Morales, who'd been taking a drink, lowered his beer slowly. His expression shifted from amused detachment to something like shock, then quickly to recognition. He stared at my name tape Brooks, as if seeing it for the first time. "Wait," he said quietly. "Valkyrie 6. He stood up abruptly, his posture snapping to attention. Ma'am. I apologize. I didn't realize. The rest of the group looked confused. Mark's smile had frozen on his face, uncertain now. What's going on? Valkyrie Flight, Gunny said, still standing at attention. Air support over Anbar Province. You were the operations officer coordinating close air support for ground units during the surge. I confirmed. My convoy, he stopped, gathered himself. My convoy got hit by a coordinated ambush in 09. 7 vehicles, 53 Marines. We called in air support and Valkyrie Flight responded within 8 minutes. The precision, he looked at his friends. They dropped ordnance danger close, took out the enemy positions without hitting any of our personnel. We had wounded, and they maintained coverage while we evacuated. Every single Marine in that convoy made it out. The silence now was complete. Even the music seemed distant, irrelevant. You flew over Anbar Province, one of the younger guys asked, his voice uncertain. I coordinated missions over multiple theaters, I said. Anbar was one of them. Mark's face had gone pale, then flushed. He looked to Rachel, who was staring at me like I was a stranger. You never said, you never asked, I interrupted quietly. You assumed. That was the heart of it, really. They'd built a complete narrative about who I was and what I did based on fragments and assumptions, and it had never occurred to any of them to verify whether that narrative matched reality. I'd let them do it because correcting them seemed petty, because my work wasn't supposed to be about ego or recognition. But there was a difference between humility and erasure, and I'd crossed that line somewhere along the way. Gunny Morales was still standing. Permission to speak freely, ma'am? I nodded. With respect, you should have said something. He glanced at Mark. We owe you an apology. Several apologies. You don't owe me anything, I said. You did your job. I did mine. It's more than that. He looked uncomfortable now, the professional veneer cracking slightly. Those missions, the coordination required, the timing, we knew whoever was running support from above was top tier. We just never expected, he gestured vaguely at the suburban backyard, the plastic cups, the casual gathering. We never expected to meet you at a family barbecue. Mark finally found his voice. Why didn't you tell us? If you'd just said, would it have mattered? I asked. Would you have listened? Or would you have found some other way to diminish it? He didn't have an answer for that. Neither did Rachel, who looked stricken now, caught between her husband's humiliation and the dawning realization that she'd participated in something cruel. I hadn't come here looking for this confrontation. I'd wanted a quiet afternoon, to see my family, to maintain the connections that military life made so difficult to sustain. But sometimes moments choose you rather than the other way around, and all you can do is meet them honestly. Valkyrie Six, Gunny repeated softly, like he was committing it to memory. Thank you for your service, ma'am. Genuinely. I nodded acknowledgement. Then I turned to my sister. Happy birthday, Rachel. I'm sorry, but I need to head back to base. Erin, wait. She reached for my arm, but I'd already stepped back. I'll call you later. I walked back through the house, grabbed my keys from the kitchen counter. My parents were talking in low voices in the living room. They'd heard some of what happened, enough to know the dynamic had shifted. Mom started to follow me, but Dad put a hand on her shoulder, let me go. The drive back to base took 40 minutes. I kept my eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel, breathing controlled. Professional. Composed. Exactly what I'd been trained to be. But something had broken open back there, something that had been sealed tight for too long. Not anger, exactly. More like clarity. The understanding that I'd been complicit in my own diminishment, and that it was time to stop. The guard at the base gate saluted as I showed my ID. I returned it automatically, drove through to the housing complex where I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment that still felt temporary after 2 years. Inside, I removed my uniform carefully, hung it precisely. Sat on the edge of my bed in the quiet, listening to the sound of evening settling over the base. My phone buzzed. Rachel, please call me when you can. I turned the phone face down on the nightstand. Tomorrow there would be consequences to manage, relationships to navigate, explanations to offer or withhold. But tonight, I just sat there in the silence, letting myself feel the full weight of what had happened. I'd told the truth. Finally, plainly, without deflection or qualification. It shouldn't have felt revolutionary, but somehow it did. I didn't call Rachel that night or the next day. I went to work instead, threw myself into the preparation for our operational readiness inspection with the single-minded focus that had always been my refuge. My office was a controlled environment where competence was measured objectively, where rank and record spoke louder than family assumptions. Captain Leah O'Connell found me at my desk at 1900 hours, still reviewing readiness reports. She was one of my junior officers, 26 years old and sharp enough that I'd been pushing her toward positions that would set her up for success at the next rank. "Ma'am, you've been here since 0530, she said. "Maybe call it a day?" "Almost finished." She didn't leave. Instead, she sat in the chair across from my desk, a move that told me she wasn't here in an official capacity. "Permission to speak candidly?" I looked up. "Granted. You seem off. Since yesterday. Everything okay?" The thing about working closely with people in high-pressure environments is that you can't hide much. They learn to read the subtle shifts in your demeanor because their effectiveness depends on understanding the command climate. O'Connell had been watching me closely enough to notice something had changed. "Family situation," I said. "Nothing that impacts operations." "Understood, ma'am." She hesitated. "For what it's worth, you taught me that it's okay to be human even in uniform. That leadership means acknowledging the whole person, not just the rank. So if you need to talk, or just need someone to listen." She trailed off, and I felt something loosen in my chest. This was what I'd built here, relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. People who understood that the uniform was important, but not all-encompassing. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate that." After she left, I finally allowed myself to check my phone. 7 messages from Rachel, 3 from my mother, 1 from my father that just said, "Take your time. We'll be here when you're ready." Mark hadn't contacted me. That was telling. The next family gathering I was invited to, I declined. Politely, professionally, without explanation. The one after that, too. Rachel's messages grew more desperate, then defensive, then angry, then quiet. My mother tried to mediate, suggesting coffee, just the two of us, but I deflected. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was creating space to figure out what kind of relationships I wanted to maintain and on what terms. The old dynamic, where I absorbed mockery for the sake of family peace, wasn't sustainable. But I hadn't yet determined what the new dynamic might look like. 3 weeks after the barbecue, Rachel showed up at the base visitor center. She'd never done that before, never intruded on my professional space. The guard at the desk called my office, asked if I was expecting a civilian visitor. "I'll be there in 5 minutes, I told him. She was waiting in the lobby, looking out of place in her sundress and sandals. The visitor center had that institutional quality beige walls, government-issue furniture, the subtle hum of fluorescent lights. She stood when she saw me, her expression uncertain. "Hi," she said. "Hi. Can we talk? I know you're working, but there's a coffee shop just off base. I have 30 minutes. We drove separately and met at a place that catered mostly to military personnel and their families. The walls were decorated with unit patches and photographs from various eras. Rachel ordered tea she didn't drink. I got black coffee and waited. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "For the barbecue. For everything leading up to it. I should have said something, should have stopped Mark, why didn't you?" She looked at her tea. "Because it felt good, I think. Having him respect me, having his friends around, feeling like I was part of something. And you've always been the accomplished one. The one who does important things. I'm just a dental hygienist who, just about your work," I interrupted. "You're good at what you do. You help people. That matters. But it's not the same." "It's not." She gestured vaguely. "It's not heroic. Neither is mine, most of the time. It's meetings and planning and reviewing reports and making sure personnel are trained and equipment is maintained. The moments that seem dramatic from outside are actually the result of years of preparation that looks boring to anyone watching." "But you saved people." Gunny said. "I coordinated resources. I did my job. So did dozens of other people in that chain of command. I leaned forward slightly. Rachel, I'm not upset because you don't understand my work. I'm upset because you participated in belittling it without ever trying to understand it. There's a difference. She absorbed that. Mark feels terrible. Mark feels embarrassed. That's not the same as remorse. That's not fair. He wants to apologize. Then he can contact me directly. We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, the coffee shop hummed with conversation, young officers discussing training schedules, a couple working through the logistics of an upcoming PCS move. My world, familiar and comfortable. I don't know how to fix this, Rachel said quietly. I don't know how to make it right. You can't fix it, I said. Not immediately. Trust gets rebuilt slowly, over time, through consistent behavior. You can start by respecting boundaries I set. You can stop making assumptions about my work. You can think before you laugh at jokes at my expense. Okay. She nodded, wiped at her eyes. Okay, I can do that. And Rachel, I waited until she looked at me. You don't need to compare your life to mine. You don't need to diminish either of us to justify your choices. We both picked paths that work for us. That should be enough. She left shortly after that, and I went back to base. The conversation hadn't resolved everything, couldn't resolve everything, but it felt like a start. Like maybe there was a way forward that didn't require me to be smaller or her to be defensive. That evening, Colonel Sandra Hayes stopped by my office. She was my commanding officer, a career officer with 28 years in uniform and the kind of steady competence that made everyone around her better. She knocked once and entered without waiting for permission, a privilege of rank and relationship. Major Brooks. I stood. Ma'am. Sit. This isn't formal. She settled into the chair O'Connell had occupied days earlier. I heard something interesting through the grapevine. About a certain barbecue and a certain call sign. I kept my expression neutral. Ma'am? Gunny Morales has a cousin in the Security Forces Squadron. Word travels. She smiled slightly. From what I understand, you reminded some people about the nature of your service. I simply answered a question, ma'am. I'm sure you did. She studied me for a moment. I'm also hearing you've been putting in 14-hour days since then. That's above your usual 12-hour standard. The inspection is important, but not an excuse to burn yourself out. She leaned back. Here's what I know about you, Major. You're one of the most competent officers I've ever supervised. You're thorough, strategic, and you inspire genuine loyalty in your personnel. You're also someone who carries weight quietly, who absorbs pressure without complaint, who puts the mission above your own needs consistently. I wasn't sure where she was going with this. Those are strengths, she continued. But they can also become liabilities if you never let anyone see when you're carrying too much. If you never push back when you should. I pushed back, ma'am. That's what created the situation with my family. Good. That's growth. She stood. What I'm saying is, don't let this pull you back into old patterns. Don't overcompensate by proving something you've already proven. You're a major in the United States Air Force, with a record that speaks for itself. Act like it. After she left, I sat at my desk thinking about what she'd said. She was right. I had been overcompensating, trying to reassert control through the thing I knew I could control, which was my work. But the real challenge wasn't professional. It was personal, and no amount of operational excellence would resolve it. My phone buzzed. Mark's number, finally. The message was short. Can we talk? I owe you a real apology. I stared at it for a long moment before responding. Call me tomorrow at 1800 hours. It was a small step, but it was movement. Forward or backward, I'd find out soon enough. For now, I packed up my work, turned off my office light, and drove home through the base at a reasonable hour. The evening was cool, clear, the kind of night that made you remember why you loved this life, despite its complications. I'd told the truth at that barbecue. Now I had to learn how to live with the consequences of that truth, whatever they turned out to be. Mark called precisely at 1800 hours the next day. I answered on the third ring, standing in my kitchen with the phone on speaker while I made dinner. Chicken breast, rice, steamed vegetables. Routine tasks helped keep conversations grounded. Aaron. Thanks for taking my call. I said I would. He exhaled audibly. Right. Look, I've been trying to figure out what to say for 3 weeks now, and I keep coming back to the same thing, which is that I was an asshole. Multiple times. Over an extended period. I didn't disagree, so I stayed silent. Gunny explained what Valkyrie Six meant, what your actual role was during those operations. And I realized he paused. I realized I've been talking about service and sacrifice for years, but I didn't recognize it when it was right in front of me. You recognized a version that looked like yours, I said. That's human. We all do that. Maybe, but that doesn't make it right. You were over there coordinating missions that kept Marines alive, and I was giving you shit about paperwork. His voice cracked slightly. That's inexcusable. I turned down the heat under the rice. What changed? Between when I first met you and now. You weren't always like this. Silence on the other end. Then, I don't know. Maybe nothing changed. Maybe I was always like this, and you just saw the version I wanted you to see initially. Or maybe, another pause. Maybe it threatened me. Having Rachel's sister be someone who outranked me, who'd done more, seen more. I spent 4 years as a lance corporal. You're a major. There's a gap there. Rank doesn't transfer across contexts, I said. You know that. I'm not your commanding officer. I'm your sister-in-law. I know. But it still felt like evidence of something. That I hadn't gone far enough, done enough. And instead of dealing with that like an adult, I tried to cut you down to size. It was more self-awareness than I'd expected from him. What does Rachel say about all this? She's pissed at me. Rightfully so. Says I made her complicit in humiliating you, and that she should have known better. He laughed humorlessly. She's been reading about military operations, trying to understand what you actually do. She watches documentaries now about air support and logistics. I think it's her way of apologizing. She already apologized. In person. I know. She told me. But she's trying to understand, which is more than I did. I plated my food, carried it to the small dining table. Here's what I need from you, Mark. I need you to stop treating my service like a topic for jokes. I need you to recognize that different branches do different work, and all of it matters. I need you to understand that when you mock me, you're not just mocking me, you're mocking everyone who does this work. Understood? Absolutely. And I need time. I'm not cutting you out, but I need space to figure out what our relationship looks like going forward. That's fair. More than fair. He cleared his throat. For what it's worth, Gunny's been riding my ass about this. Says if I ever disrespect an officer like that again, especially one with your record, he'll make sure everyone in our professional network knows about it. Gunny's a good NCO. He is. He also said something that stuck with me. He said that the best officers he served under were the ones who never needed to prove they were in charge, because everyone already knew it. That true authority doesn't announce itself. I considered that. Sounds like Gunny. Look, I know this doesn't fix anything. I know you don't have any reason to trust that I'm being genuine. But I'm trying to be better. Not just for you, but for Rachel and for myself. I built a life on being the tough guy, the Marine who knew how things worked, and I never examined whether that person was worth being. We talked for a few more minutes, settling nothing but establishing a baseline. When we hung up, I felt tired but not angry. The exhaustion was the kind that comes from confronting something difficult, from doing the emotional labor that people usually avoid. I ate my dinner, cleaned up, changed into civilian clothes. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I called a friend from flight school. Alicia had transitioned out of active duty 2 years ago, now flew commercial cargo routes, and lived in Seattle with her wife. Erin Brooks, she said when she answered. To what do I owe this rare honor? Can't I just call to say hi? You can, but you usually don't. Which means something happened. I told her about the barbecue, about Rachel and Mark, about the past few weeks of sorting through what it all meant. She listened without interrupting, which was one of her strengths. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. How do you feel? She asked finally. I'm not sure. Lighter, maybe. But also exposed in a way that's uncomfortable. You spent 12 years learning to be unflappable under pressure. That means you also learned to hide when things affect you. Being visible again, being seen, that's going to feel strange. Is it worth it? I asked. Being visible. Maintaining civilian relationships that require constant explanation. That's the question, isn't it? She laughed softly. I don't know, Erin. I chose to get out partially because I got tired of maintaining two separate versions of myself. But you're not me. You love what you do in a way I never quite managed. She was right. Despite the complications, despite the sacrifices, I couldn't imagine leaving. The work mattered to me in a way that transcended the personal costs. We talked for another hour about nothing important, her wife's new restaurant venture, the absurdities of commercial aviation, a vacation they were planning to Vancouver. Normal conversation between old friends, the kind I'd let lapse in favor of professional relationships. After we hung up, I sat in my living room looking at the few personal items I'd accumulated, photographs from various postings, a flag from my first deployment, my academy graduation photo. Not much to show for 34 years of life, but each item meant something specific. My promotion board for 05 was in 3 months. Lieutenant Colonel. Command of a full squadron if I was selected. More responsibility, more pressure, more of everything that had made my personal life complicated. But also more opportunity to mentor officers like Captain O'Connell, to shape operations in ways that kept people safer, to use everything I'd learned in service of something larger than myself. The choice between personal comfort and professional fulfillment wasn't really a choice at all. I'd made it years ago, and everything since had been a negotiation of the terms. What had changed was my willingness to let other people make me feel small for that choice. Rachel's reaction and Mark's apology had shown me something important, that boundaries weren't punishments. They were clarifications. They told people how to treat you and gave them the option to rise to that standard or step away. Some would step away. That was okay. Others, like Rachel, would try to understand. That was worth encouraging. And a few, like Gunny Morales, already understood without explanation. Those relationships were gold. I went to bed that night thinking about the promotion board, about the statement I'd have to write explaining why I deserved to advance, what I'd accomplished, and what I aimed to achieve. It was the kind of self-advocacy that had always felt uncomfortable, like bragging. But Colonel Hayes had been clear. I needed to act like someone who'd already proven themselves. That meant stating my qualifications plainly, without apology or hedging. It meant being as clear about my strengths as I'd been at that barbecue when I'd said Valkyrie Six. Just 2 words, but they'd rewritten the entire story. Maybe that was the lesson, that sometimes the truth is enough. You don't need to dress it up or apologize for it. You just need to say it clearly and let people decide what to do with the information. I fell asleep thinking about Lieutenant Jason Lee, about the memorial service where I'd stood in my dress blues and promised his mother that his service mattered. That he died doing something that saved others. It occurred to me that I'd never quite extended that same grace to myself, never quite allowed that my service mattered in the same fundamental way. I'd always qualified it, diminished it, made it smaller so other people wouldn't feel threatened. But Lee's death had taught me that this work had consequences. That the missions I planned and coordinated weren't abstract exercises. They were life and death, and doing them well meant people went home to their families. That was worth defending. Worth claiming. Worth refusing to diminish for anyone's comfort. Tomorrow, I'd start drafting my promotion board statement. I'd list my accomplishments plainly, the missions, the awards, the personnel I'd developed, the operations I'd improved. And I wouldn't apologize for any of it. The weeks that followed fell into a new pattern. I maintained limited contact with Rachel, brief phone calls every few days, updates on life that stayed surface level. We were rebuilding trust incrementally, which was the only way trust could be rebuilt. Mark stayed in the background, respecting the space I demanded. My parents adjusted too. Mom stopped asking when I'd visit, started asking instead if I had time for a call. Dad sent articles about Air Force operations he found interesting, his way of trying to understand my world. It wasn't perfect, but it was effort, and effort mattered. At work, the operational readiness inspection consumed most of my focus. My squadron performed well, no major discrepancies, commendable ratings across the board. Colonel Hayes made a point of highlighting my planning in her debriefing to wing leadership, which felt both validating and uncomfortable. I still wasn't entirely used to visibility. Captain O'Connell's development continued to impress me. She'd started taking initiative on complex problems, showing the kind of strategic thinking that marked future senior officers. During one particularly challenging briefing, she'd navigated pushback from a visiting general with the perfect balance of respect and confidence. "You handled that well," I told her afterward. "I watched how you do it, ma'am. Stay calm, stick to facts, don't get defensive." "Where'd you learn to watch so carefully?" She smiled. "I'm the youngest of 5 kids. You learn to read rooms early when you're trying to survive family dinner." It reminded me that everyone brought their full selves to work, even when the uniform suggested otherwise. O'Connell's family dynamics had taught her skills that made her better at her job, just as my recent family crisis was teaching me about boundaries and self-advocacy. 6 weeks after the barbecue, I submitted my promotion board package. The personal statement had gone through 11 drafts before I was satisfied. Colonel Hayes had reviewed it, made a few suggestions, ultimately approved it. "This is strong," she'd said. "You're making a clear case without overreaching. The board will take notice." "Thank you, ma'am. You know what I see in this statement that I don't usually see from you?" She'd tapped the paper. "Confidence. Not arrogance, actual confidence. The knowledge that you've earned your place and don't need to apologize for it." She was right. The statement read differently than anything I'd written before. It was assertive without being aggressive, proud without being boastful. It was the written equivalent of saying Valkyrie Six and letting the record speak for itself. 8 weeks after the barbecue, Rachel called to say she and Mark wanted to host a dinner. Small, just the 4 of us, Rachel, Mark, me, and anyone I wanted to bring. "I don't have anyone to bring," I said. "My life doesn't really accommodate dating right now." "That's okay. I just meant, if you wanted moral support." I considered it. "When? Next Saturday? 1800 hours. I'll think about it." "Erin." Her voice softened. "I know this is hard. I know we messed up badly. But I'm trying. We both are. And I miss you. I miss my sister." That landed harder than I'd expected. "I miss you too. But I don't miss who I was when I was around you. I don't miss feeling like I had to be smaller. You never have to be smaller. Not ever again. I promise." I wanted to believe her. "Let me think about it. I'll let you know by Wednesday." When I hung up, I sat with the question. Did I want to rebuild this relationship, knowing the work it would require? Knowing that trust, once broken, always retained hairline cracks even after repair? The alternative was simpler: maintain the distance, keep my life compartmentalized, invest in relationships that didn't require constant negotiation. It would be easier, cleaner. But it would also mean giving up on family, and I wasn't quite ready to do that. On Tuesday, I ran into Gunny Morales at a joint training event on base. He was there as a civilian contractor now, consulting on security protocols. When he saw me, he approached immediately, came to attention. "Ma'am." "Gunny." "At ease. You're a civilian now, you don't have to do that. Old habits." He relaxed marginally. "I wanted to thank you again, ma'am. For what you did for my convoy." I never got the chance to say that properly. "You thanked me at the barbecue." That was reactionary. I was shocked. "I want you to know," he chose his words carefully. "I want you to know that what you did that day, the precision of that support, it was the difference between some of us coming home and none of us coming home. So thank you. Genuinely." I nodded acknowledgement. "You would have done the same in my position." "Maybe. But you actually did it. That matters." He hesitated. "Mark's been talking to me about all this. About how badly he handled things. I think he's genuinely trying to do better. People can change," I said carefully. "But they have to choose to do the work. He's choosing. For what that's worth." After Gunny left, I thought about what he'd said. About people choosing to change, to do better, to grow beyond their worst moments. I'd seen it in young officers I mentored, people who made mistakes, owned them, and emerged stronger. Maybe Mark deserved the same opportunity. On Wednesday, I called Rachel back. "I'll come to dinner on Saturday." "Really?" The relief in her voice was palpable. "Oh, Erin, thank you. Thank you. Ground rules, though. No military jokes. No deflection. If things get uncomfortable, we address it directly rather than laughing it off." "Absolutely. Whatever you need. And Rachel, this is a trial. One dinner. We see how it goes." I understand. That's more than fair. Saturday arrived with the particular kind of nervousness that comes from re-entering a space where you've been hurt. I dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, a sweater, nothing that marked me as military. This was about being a sister, not an officer. Their house was in a development 20 minutes from base, standard suburban architecture with carefully maintained landscaping. Mark answered the door, his expression carefully neutral. Aaron. Thanks for coming. Mark. Rachel appeared behind him, ushering me inside with nervous energy. Come in, come in. I made lasagna, I remembered you liked it. The house smelled good, garlic, tomato sauce, bread warming in the oven. They'd set the table formally, with cloth napkins and the nice dishes. It felt like they were trying very hard, which was both touching and slightly painful to witness. We settled into careful conversation over dinner. They asked about my work in ways that felt genuinely curious rather than performative. I asked about their lives, Mark's business, Rachel's practice, their plans for the house. We found neutral ground and stayed there, no one willing to risk disrupting the fragile peace. Halfway through the meal, Mark set down his fork. I need to say something, and I'm just going to say it straight. I disrespected you, repeatedly, and I'm ashamed of that. Not because you're my sister-in-law or because it turns out you had this impressive military record, but because I should have respected you regardless. You deserved basic human dignity, and I failed to give you that. Rachel was watching him carefully, clearly uncertain whether this was going well or poorly. I accept your apology, I said finally. But I need you to understand, this isn't just about what happened at the barbecue. It's about a pattern that developed over 2 years. That doesn't get fixed with one apology. I know. I'm not asking for instant forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to prove I've learned something. We held eye contact for a long moment. Then I nodded. Okay, let's see. The rest of dinner relaxed incrementally. We weren't back to normal, might never be back to whatever normal had been, but we'd established a new baseline. One built on honesty rather than assumptions, on boundaries rather than endless accommodation. When I left that night, Rachel walked me to my car. Thank you for giving us another chance. I'm not sure that's what I'm doing, I said. I'm staying open to possibility. That's different. I'll take it. She hugged me carefully. I really am sorry, Aaron. For all of it. I know. We'll figure it out. Driving home, I felt something that might have been cautious optimism. The relationship would never be what it was before, but maybe what it was before hadn't been particularly healthy anyway. Maybe this new version, built on clearer foundations, could be better. Or maybe it couldn't. Time would tell. What mattered was that I'd advocated for myself, set boundaries, and refused to accept less than I deserved. The outcome was secondary to the principle. Back at my apartment, I checked my email out of habit. There was a message from Colonel Hayes with the subject line FYI. I opened it. Your promotion board results came early. Check your official notifications. Congratulations, Lieutenant Colonel Brooks. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. Then I sat down hard on my couch, staring at the screen. Oh, 5. Lieutenant Colonel. The promotion I'd been working toward for years. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt quiet. Settled. Like something that had been inevitable finally arriving. I called my parents. Mom cried. Dad said he was proud, his voice thick with emotion. I called Rachel, who screamed into the phone and insisted on throwing a celebration. I called Alicia in Seattle, who laughed and said, "It's about damn time." Then I called Colonel Hayes, who answered on the first ring. "You saw," she said. I saw. Thank you, ma'am, for everything. You earned it, Aaron. Every bit. Now comes the hard part, living up to the rank. Yes, ma'am. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment thinking about what came next. A new position, new responsibilities, new challenges. The work would get harder, not easier. The stakes would stay high. But I'd proven something to myself over these past few months. That I could advocate for myself without apology. That I could set boundaries and maintain them. That I could be fully visible, all of who I was, all I'd accomplished, without diminishing myself for anyone's comfort. Valkyrie Six had rewritten the story. But Lieutenant Colonel Brooks would write the next chapter. and she'd do it on her own terms. The promotion ceremony was scheduled for 6 weeks out, which gave me time to settle into the reality of it. Time to let the news spread through my squadron, to receive congratulations from colleagues, to start thinking about what command of a full squadron would actually entail. Captain O'Connell was one of the first to congratulate me officially. She stopped by my office the morning after the announcement, came to attention at my door. "Ma'am, congratulations on your selection for O5. "Thank you, Captain." At ease. She relaxed, but only slightly. "I wanted to say, you've been an incredible mentor. Watching how you lead, how you handle pressure, how you advocate for your personnel, it's changed how I think about leadership. That means a lot, coming from you." "I also wanted to ask," she hesitated. "When you take command of your new squadron, would you consider putting me in for a position on your staff? I know that's forward, but I learn more from you than anyone else I've worked with." I studied her for a moment. She was serious, eager, willing to follow me into what would certainly be a challenging assignment. That kind of loyalty was rare and worth acknowledging. "Let me see what positions open up," I said. "But yes, I'd like to have you on my team if we can make it work." Her face lit up. "Thank you, ma'am. I won't disappoint you." After she left, I thought about the responsibility that came with mentorship. O'Connell saw me as a model for how to navigate this career, which meant my choices carried weight beyond my own trajectory. How I handled the next phase would influence how she approached hers. It was sobering and energizing in equal measure. Rachel called that evening. "Mom told me about the ceremony date. Can I help plan anything? A reception maybe? The Air Force handles most of it. It's pretty standard: flags, speeches, pin the new rank, take photos. But after, you have to celebrate properly. Please let me do something." I considered saying no, maintaining the boundary. But she was trying genuinely, and sometimes you had to let people show care in the ways that made sense to them. "Something small," I said finally. "Family, close friends. Nothing elaborate. I can do small. I promise." She paused. "Erin, I'm really proud of you. I know I haven't always shown it properly, but I am. You've accomplished something remarkable." "Thank you. And I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that. To really understand it." We talked for a while longer, planning logistics, discussing who should be invited. It felt almost normal, this easy conversation between sisters. Almost like we were finding our way back to something recognizable. The weeks leading up to the ceremony were consumed by transition planning. My current position needed to be backfilled, my next assignment coordinated, personnel reassignments processed. The machinery of military bureaucracy ground forward with its characteristic thoroughness. Colonel Hayes called me into her office 3 weeks before the ceremony. "Sit. I have your next assignment details." I sat, attentive. "You'll be taking command of the 447th Operations Support Squadron at Joint Base Andrews. 320 personnel, complex operational requirements, direct support to senior leadership missions." Andrews. That was significant. High visibility, critical operations, the kind of assignment that either made or broke senior officers. "Understood, ma'am. When do I assume command?" 90 days after your promotion. Gives you time to clear out here, get read in on the new mission, meet your leadership team." She leaned back. "This is a proving ground assignment, Erin. You do well here, you're on track for O6. You struggle, it's noticeable." "I won't struggle, ma'am." "I know you won't. That's why I recommended you for it." The revelation that she'd actively advocated for me to get this assignment shifted something. I'd always known she supported my career, but this was more direct intervention than I'd realized. "Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down. You never have." She smiled slightly. "Now get out of here. You have packing to plan." That evening, I sat in my apartment looking at everything I'd accumulated during this assignment. Not much. Military life taught you to travel light. But each item represented something. The coffee maker I'd bought to avoid the office break room, the running shoes I'd worn through on early morning routes around the base, the photograph of my flight school class that had survived 7 moves. I'd be packing again soon, starting over in a new location. Some people found that exhausting. I'd always found it clarifying. Each move was a chance to reassess, to keep only what mattered, to arrive at the new place unencumbered by excess weight. My phone rang. Alicia from Seattle. So, she said when I answered. Andrews. That's impressive. You heard already? I have my sources. Also, Colonel Hayes might have called me to give me a heads up since I'm one of your references. I smiled. She's thorough. She's protective of you, which is good. You need someone watching your six. Alicia paused. This is a big deal, Aaron. Command at Andrews. That's not a participation trophy. I'm aware. Are you ready for it? I thought about that question seriously. I think so. I've been preparing for this my whole career, whether I knew it or not. Good answer. And hey, Virginia's closer to Seattle than Texas was. Maybe I can actually visit. I'd like that. After we hung up, I pulled out a notebook and started making lists. Things to research about Andrews. Personnel files to review. Questions to ask during the transition. The practical details that would make the first 90 days manageable. But underneath the logistics, I felt something else, anticipation. This was what I'd been working toward. Not just the rank, but the opportunity to lead at a level where decisions had significant impact. To shape an organization, to develop the next generation of officers, to contribute to something larger than myself. The barbecue incident, the family drama, all of it had been necessary in a way I hadn't understood at the time. It had forced me to confront how I'd been diminishing myself, to recalibrate my relationship with my own accomplishments. I'd arrived at this promotion more grounded, more clear-eyed about who I was and what I'd earned. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks would take command at Andrews with that clarity intact. The promotion ceremony itself arrived with the particular mix of formality and emotion that military rituals cultivated. The base chapel was filled, my squadron, colleagues from other units, my family in the front row. Rachel sat beside our parents, Mark next to her, all of them dressed carefully for the occasion. Colonel Hayes presided, her voice carrying the weight of her own 28 years of service. She read the promotion orders with perfect precision, each word deliberate. Then she unpinned my major insignia and replaced them with the silver oak leaves of a lieutenant colonel. Congratulations, Lieutenant Colonel Brooks. Thank you, ma'am. The ceremony concluded with the traditional receiving line, where people congratulated me and posed for photographs. My squadron members came through first, respectful but pleased. Captain O'Connell was near tears when she shook my hand. Then my family. Mom hugged me tightly, told me she loved me. Dad shook my hand formally before pulling me into an embrace. Proud of you, kiddo. Rachel was next. She looked at my new rank insignia, then at me. Lieutenant Colonel. God, Aaron. You did it. We'll see how I do with it. You'll do great. I know you will. Mark stepped forward last. We hadn't had much contact since the dinner, but he'd shown up today, which counted for something. Congratulations, ma'am. He kept it formal, appropriate. I hope you know how much I respect what you've accomplished. Thank you, Mark. We held eye contact for a moment. Understanding passed between us, not forgiveness necessarily, but acknowledgement. We'd both grown past who we'd been at that barbecue. Whether we could build something better remained to be seen. The reception Rachel had planned was indeed small, just family and a few close colleagues at a restaurant near base. The conversation flowed easily, everyone relaxed in a way that formal ceremonies didn't allow. My parents told stories about me as a kid, about the time I'd organized all my stuffed animals into rank order and conducted morning formations. She was always going to be military, Dad said. We just didn't know it yet. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing outside the restaurant with Rachel, both of us getting some air while others settled the bill. This was nice, I said. Thank you for organizing it. It was the least I could do. She looked at me sideways. You're leaving soon. For Andrews. 90 days. That's far. She said it quietly, a statement of fact rather than complaint. It's where the assignment is. I know. And I'm glad for you, truly. It's just, she stopped, gathered her thoughts. It's just that we finally started figuring things out, and now you're leaving again. That's always how it is with you. You come into our lives, we get reminded of how remarkable you are, and then you leave. That's the nature of military service, I said gently. I don't get to choose where I go. I know. I'm not blaming you. I'm going to miss you. I'll miss you too. We stood there in the evening air, two sisters who'd taken very different paths and were only now learning how to appreciate rather than resent those differences. Will you visit? Rachel asked. After you get settled? If I can. Work schedule permitting. Of course. She smiled slightly. The work always comes first with you. It has to. That's what I signed up for. I know. And honestly, I admire that about you now. I used to think it meant you didn't care about us. But I understand better now, you care about something bigger than us. There's honor in that. It was maybe the most insightful thing she'd ever said about my career. Thank you. We went back inside together. The group was preparing to leave, people gathering coats and saying final goodbyes. I accepted more congratulations, more handshakes, more promises to stay in touch that we'd all probably struggle to keep. On the drive home, I thought about what Rachel had said. About leaving, about the work coming first, about caring about something bigger. She was right, I'd made that choice years ago, and every assignment since had reaffirmed it. Some people built their lives around permanence, stable locations, enduring relationships, accumulated possessions. I'd built mine around service, which meant accepting impermanence as a fundamental condition. Neither approach was better. They were just different, requiring different sacrifices and offering different rewards. The apartment felt quiet when I returned, already taking on the quality of a place I was preparing to leave. I changed out of my uniform, now bearing the new rank, and hung it carefully. Tomorrow, I'd start the out-processing procedures, begin the long checklist that would officially close this chapter. But tonight, I just sat in the quiet, letting myself feel the weight of what had happened. The promotion. The ceremony. The family attending despite our complicated history. The promise of a new assignment that would test everything I'd learned. I'd told the truth at a barbecue 3 months ago, and that truth had set in motion a series of consequences I couldn't have predicted. Boundaries established. Relationships renegotiated. Self-advocacy practiced and strengthened. And now, a promotion that would let me lead at a level I'd been preparing for my entire career. Valkyrie Six had been more than a call sign. It had been a declaration that I would no longer diminish myself for anyone's comfort, that my service mattered, that I deserved to be seen fully. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks would carry that declaration forward into whatever came next. The work would be hard. The sacrifices would be real. But I'd face them with clarity about who I was and what I'd earned. That was enough. That was everything. Here's where I'll leave it. I set a boundary and the room learned my name. If this resonated, tap like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that quiet work still carries weight. Drop your answers below. Have you ever had a call sign moment where the room finally understood who you are? What's the line you won't let family cross anymore? If they apologized later, did you accept it or keep your distance, and why? For my veterans and service families, what's the most misunderstood part of your job? Where are you tuning in from tonight?